In ancient civilizations, we're going to see that cities and towns were always started on the banks of a river. Being close to a river was important for a whole list of reasons we're going to find out about. Examples. In Egypt, of course, civilization developed up and down the Nile. In India, we see two main rivers, the Ganges and the Indus rivers, are going to be the home of the earliest civilizations there. One nearly universal pattern is that ancient civilizations begin near rivers. And there's a list of reasons you can see. Water to drink, water for agricultural uses, transportation, barges going up and down the river, and of course, fish that can be eaten. This pattern is all around the world. Civilizations start near rivers. If we look at the ancient Near East, there's this phrase Fertile Crescent, and that includes two legs, one coming from the Persian Gulf, going northwest along two rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, and ending at the city of Haran, and then from Haran going southeast along the edge of the Mediterranean Sea, along the Jordan River. And those two together form sort of a crescent shape. Mesopotamia is the word that refers to the land between the rivers, between the Euphrates and the Tigris. So that long first leg of the Fertile Crescent is Mesopotamia, running from the Persian Gulf up to Haran. Mesopotamia is going to be the home of Babylonia, one of the early large empires, and Babylonia was in turn formed by a union between two smaller kingdoms, Akkad and Sumer. Egypt, likewise, oriented around a river, the Nile, as is famously known, which sort of defines the culture, the society, the civilization of Egypt. In India, likewise, we see the Ganges and the Indus, which shaped the early civilizations of that part of India. And in China, two main rivers are running roughly parallel from west to east, the Huanghe and the Changyang, with variations on those names in English. In these early river valley civilizations, we see the appearance of some of the first writing. It will begin with pictographic writing with symbols, hieroglyphs, and moving eventually to a more sophisticated form of alphabetic writing. Unfortunately, not all was well in these early river valley civilizations. Human sacrifice is a ubiquitous practice in the very early stages of history. A pre-religious practice that focused on an attempt to manipulate nature and manipulate the imagined gods or goddesses into giving them good weather, military victory, etc. The good news is we're going to see human sacrifice being phased out starting sometime around 1950 BC. Lessons we can learn from these early civilizations. Weakness is provocative. River valley locations are difficult to defend. They're located in plains. They don't have the natural advantages of being up in the highlands. And in fact, they are subject to forces coming down from the highlands. Second lesson is we're going to see cooperation, civilization, infrastructure being built. People are going to decide they can work together for irrigation, flood control, etc., etc. So we see civilizations starting along rivers in ancient times. That tradition, that pattern carried forward thousands of years into modern history. And if you look around the United States, you'll see most of the cities in America and towns started on the banks of rivers. But when we look in ancient times or modern times, we can kind of divide the rivers into two categories. There are those that flood erratically and unpredictably, and there are those that flood on a very regular schedule. And that's going to make a big difference in the way civilization starts on those riverbanks. The Nile flooded predictably. The Egyptians came to count on it flooding at certain times, and it allowed their agriculture and their other industries and businesses to function quite well. The Tigris, the Euphrates, for example, flooded unpredictably, and that caused a lot of problems. Water management became a big challenge. Hammurabi was the famous Babylonian king who gave a series of laws, the Code as it was known, and these were one of the earliest recorded legal systems, so it gets attention for that reason. The copy of it that's best known is engraved in small cuneiform writing on this stone, which at its top contains a portrait of Hammurabi conversing with a Babylonian god. Hammurabi's Code gets attention because it is a clear and early statement of the rule of law. And the idea of the rule of the law is it is written, it's publicly available, it is objective, and it stands on its own, independent of human interpretation or human enforcement. Law becomes an objective thing. Now, some people don't like this phrase, the rule of law. They say it sounds harsh or cruel, but what is the alternative to the rule of law? The alternative would be the rule of one individual who was free to arbitrarily act according to his whims. Rule of law sets standards which are uniform, equal, and fair. Hammurabi's Code, however, had some drawbacks. The death penalty was applied quite frequently, quite liberally. Crimes against property, so theft, could be punishable by death, which flies in the face of our Western European notion that human life is valuable and that for mere crimes of theft, the death penalty should not be applied. Other drawbacks from a modern point of view, and of course drawbacks is a relative, somewhat subjective term, but ways in which Hammurabi's Code fails to live up to a European or Judeo-Christian perspective. Gender and class discrimination was rife throughout his code. Women were subject to harsher penalties. People of lower economic classes were subject to worse treatment. Human life in general was exchangeable for cash value. It could be monetized. Legal convictions were sometimes possible on accusation instead of evidence, proof, or testimony. And Hammurabi's Code was reactive, simply stating an action and the legal consequence for it. There was no ethical aspect to the code which would encourage good behavior. Civilizations begin along rivers, but in a couple of places there's an interesting pattern where there are two rivers running roughly parallel to each other, and this has the possibility of the potential of forming very powerful situations because you got double the rivers. So for example, in China there are two rivers that run roughly parallel to each other from west to east. They dump into the Pacific or the China Sea there. The northern of the two is called the Yellow River or the Huanghe. The southern one is called the Yangtze or the Shangjiang River, but two rivers running parallel. Same thing happened in the ancient Near East. That parallel pattern between the Euphrates and the Tigris running roughly southeast from around Haran, dumping into the Arabian Gulf, and you see those two parallel together. The land between those two, Mesopotamia, That word means literally between the rivers. And so you have great potential there because you got two rivers side by side, and that turns out to be one of the earliest advanced civilizations. Now, they did have some things to deal with because, as we noted earlier, those rivers don't flood predictably like the Nile. They flood unpredictably, so it meant they had to organize and collaborate and cooperate and develop some flood control systems, some irrigation, some canals, which of course was a forced advancement in technology and civilization. The unpredictable flooding also led to the culture of fertility religions. What is a fertility religion? Well, it's not really a religion. It's more like a mixture of myth and magic and attempted manipulation of nature, concerns for rainfall on the right schedule to keep your crops growing, keep your animals happy and producing, and so that was shaped the pre-religious phase of those cultures there. Now, Mesopotamia had a number of large city-states, and we're going to see it's going to be the unification of two of them. There's a place called Babylon and a place called Akkad, and when those two unite under the leadership of a guy named Sargon, we're going to see the emergence of the big empire of Babylonia. So Babylon plus Akkad equals Babylonia, two large city-states forming an empire. Hammurabi is going to come along after Akkad and, as we saw, develop that legal system. In another location in Egypt along the Isle, we see a guy named Narmer who's going to unite southern Egypt and northern Egypt to form that empire. So a couple of themes here: rivers, parallel rivers, unifications to form larger empires, all patterns of these early civilizations.